2 weeks ago, I was standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle. I have been walking down my entire adult life, and something stopped me cold. Not because the shelves were empty. They were not. They looked completely normal at first glance. Fully stocked, clean, bright lights, the same packaging I have seen for years. But I had been tracking this specific store for 3 months. Visiting on the same days. Walking the same aisles, writing down what was there and what was not. And I knew something that nobody else in that aisle could see. 6 of the items that used to sit on that shelf were gone. Not sold out, not temporarily out of stock. Gone. No tag. No label, no notice from management. Just an empty space where something used to be, and nobody around me was paying any attention to it at all. And here's the part that stayed with me long after I left that store. The people who had already removed those items from their shopping lists were not panicking when they did it. They were not on the news. They were not posting about it online or warning their neighbors. They were just quietly, calmly, adding a few extra things to their regular grocery carts over the course of several weeks. A nurse I spoke with, a retired school teacher, a guy who runs a landscaping business in my area. None of them fit any prepper stereotype. All of them had noticed the same pattern. And all of them had already acted on it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which 9 foods are disappearing from store shelves right now, why it is happening, what the people who have already noticed are doing about it, and whether there is still time for you to do the same. Let us get into it. Why this is different from every other shortage story before I get into the specific foods. I need you to understand something about how these shortages actually begin. Because if you are waiting to see empty shelves before you take it seriously, you have already missed the window. That is not how it works. That is not how it has ever worked. What happens first is subtle. A brand that used to come in 3 sizes now only comes in 1. A product that used to have its own full section of shelf space now shares a smaller slot with 2 other items. A specific variety or format that you used to buy every single week is just quietly no longer available. The store does not announce it. There is no press release. There is no warning sign taped to the shelf. 1 week the item is there. The next week there is a small gap. And within a month, that gap has a temporary out-of-stock tag on it. Eventually, even the tag disappears, because the store no longer expects a restock and has quietly stopped ordering it. According to retail analytics data published this year, nearly 7,900 retail and grocery stores across the United States are projected to close in 2026 alone. Only about 5,500 new locations are expected to open. That is a net loss of over 2,000 stores in a single year. And right now, close to 30 million Americans already live in what are classified as food deserts, meaning the nearest full-service supermarket is 10 to 20 miles away. The disappearing stores are serious. But the disappearing products inside the stores that are still open might actually be the bigger problem. The problem is not what you can see. It is what you no longer notice is missing. And the people who are acting right now are not doing so because of something dramatic they saw in the news. They are acting because of something quiet they noticed on a shelf. Let me show you what they noticed. Canned butter. About 2 months ago, I walked into a local farm supply store and witnessed something that immediately caught my attention. A woman in her 70s was standing in the canned goods section, calmly placing can after can into her shopping cart. Methodically, without any hurry, she cleared the entire shelf. Every single one they had. About 18 cans in total. And what struck me was not panic or urgency. She moved with the steady focus of someone completing a routine task she had done many times before. I introduced myself and asked what she was stocking up on. She told me her family had lived through the Great Depression, and according to her grandmother, butter was always one of the very first foods to disappear from store shelves during hard times, and one of the very last to come back. She was not expecting the world to end. She was simply following the habits her family had practiced for generations. Preparing quietly while things were still available, before the shortage became obvious to everyone else. After that conversation, I dug into how canned butter is actually produced and distributed in this country. What I found was surprising. Right now, there are only 3 major brands in the United States producing genuine shelf-stable canned butter. 3 companies serving the entire country, and 2 of those 3 have recently run into serious production problems. One experienced a fire at a processing facility that significantly slowed their output. The other is not struggling with butter itself, but with something much simpler. A shortage of the metal cans needed to package the product. Demand is climbing while supply is shrinking. That is the exact formula that leads to shortages. Under cool storage conditions, most brands of canned butter last anywhere from 5 to 10 years without losing quality. Compare that to a regular stick of butter in your refrigerator, which starts declining in about 3 to 4 weeks. Even freezing is not a perfect solution because after roughly 6 months, it develops freezer burn and loses flavor. One can typically holds the equivalent of about 3 standard sticks. When you are thinking about building a real buffer for your family, That kind of shelf life changes the entire equation. She was not scared. She was simply early. Evaporated milk in pull-tab cans. This was one I did not notice right away. It took several months of deliberately watching store inventory before the pattern became clear, which honestly shows you how quietly these things begin. For the past 3 months, I have been rotating through 6 different grocery stores on a regular schedule. Each visit I paid close attention to what was fully stocked, what was running low, and what was missing entirely. About 2 months in, I started noticing small gaps where the pull-tab evaporated milk normally sat. At first, just a few missing cans. Then shelves, only partially filled. Before long, several of those stores had entire sections sitting empty with nothing but out-of-stock tags where the product used to be. The pull-tab feature might sound like a minor detail, but it matters far more than most people realize. In situations like power outages, evacuations, or any disruption to your normal routine, being able to open a can without needing a separate tool is the kind of thing you do not appreciate until you need it and do not have it. I spent 2 full weeks replacing the fresh milk my family normally uses with evaporated milk. We used it in everything: coffee, cereal, mashed potatoes, baked goods, pasta sauces. Not a single person in my house noticed the switch. The mashed potatoes actually turned out better, richer, creamier than usual. Nutritionally, a single cup provides roughly 16 grams of protein because the water content has been removed and the nutrition is more concentrated. I spoke with a distribution manager who has spent more than 30 years in the dairy industry. Off the record, he explained something that most people never consider. When dairy production becomes strained, shelf-stable products get pushed lower on the priority list. Fresh milk and cheese bring in higher profit margins. So when factories deal with staffing shortages, maintenance delays, or reduced capacity, those products get the available resources first. Items like evaporated milk end up produced less frequently and shipped in smaller quantities. That is not a temporary hiccup. That is a structural problem that quietly starves store shelves over time. 16 grams of protein per cup, and the store was out of it for 6 weeks straight. Canned tomato paste. About 2 weeks ago, I stopped by a large grocery chain to pick up a few small cans of tomato paste for dinner that night. When I reached the shelf, it was completely empty. Not a single can. All that remained was a small handwritten note taped to the shelf that said limited availability. I figured it was a delivery delay. I drove to 2 other stores nearby. Both had the exact same situation. Bare shelves? No tomato paste? Just space where the product used to be. I tracked down a stock clerk who had worked at one of those stores for more than 10 years. He told me their main supplier had been backordered on tomato paste for about 6 weeks. When a partial shipment does arrive, those few cases sell out within hours. And according to him, corporate management had already told employees not to expect normal stock levels until sometime next year. Here is what puts this in perspective. California produces roughly 95% of all processed tomatoes in the United States. That is not a rough estimate. That is the overwhelming majority of the entire country's supply coming from one state. And right now, California's tomato industry is under serious pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Water restrictions are limiting what farmers can grow. Labor shortages are making it harder to harvest and process the crops that do get planted. Operating costs have climbed so high that some smaller producers are scaling back or shutting down entirely. On top of all that, the cost of steel and aluminum cans has risen significantly, which means food companies shift their focus toward products with higher profit margins. Small cans of tomato paste fall into the low-margin category, which means they are often among the first items reduced or cut from production lines. 95% of the country's supply. From one state that is running out of water. Bulk yeast. Since January, I have been keeping track of yeast inventory at 8 different grocery stores. Every single one of those 8 stores has gone through at least 2 separate periods where yeast was not just running low, it was completely gone for a week or longer. Last month, 4 of the 8 were out at the same time. When I asked store managers what was happening, their answers were almost identical. The issue was not customers buying it all at once. Overnight, it was that suppliers simply were not delivering regular shipments, and nobody had a clear timeline for when that would change. One procurement manager at a regional chain told me yeast had recently been placed on what they internally call the red list. Their category for products they are genuinely concerned about being able to keep in stock consistently. Production of yeast in North America is concentrated in a relatively small number of facilities. Back in 2020, when home baking exploded in popularity, manufacturers ramped up. Later, when that surge cooled, production was scaled back down. But here is the issue. While the initial rush faded, the habit of baking at home stuck around for a significant number of people. Baseline demand today is still meaningfully higher than it was before 2020. While production capacity has largely returned to pre-pandemic levels, the numbers simply do not line up. The best long-term solution most people do not know about is vacuum-sealed yeast bricks. 1-pound blocks sealed tightly and stored in the freezer. Kept this way, they can last 5 years or more with very little loss and effectiveness. Each block contains the equivalent of more than 60 individual yeast packets. You break off what you need, let it come to room temperature, and use it exactly as you normally would. When 4 stores run out of the same item at the same time, that is not bad luck. That is a signal. Shelf-stable bacon. But a year and a half ago, I came across this product in a camping supply store and assumed it was a novelty. Fully cooked bacon, sealed in a vacuum pouch. No refrigeration needed. Good on the shelf for around 18 months. Sounded too strange to take seriously. I bought 1 pouch to test it. Got home, tossed the bacon in a pan, warmed it for 30 seconds. It genuinely tasted like bacon. Not the absolute best bacon you have ever had on a relaxed Sunday morning, but unmistakably real, savory, familiar, satisfying. I went back and bought 20 more. Here is why this matters more than it seems at first. In situations where normal food supplies are disrupted, protein sources tend to be limited and often not very appealing. Canned chicken is decent. Canned tuna works, and beyond that, a lot of canned meat falls into the category of edible. If you are hungry enough, shelf-stable bacon is different. It is not just protein. It is fat, flavor, and aroma all in one small package. Add it to rice, beans, potatoes, pasta, almost anything, and the entire dish changes character. Last winter, during a power outage, my family spent 3 days eating mostly cold canned food. By the end of it, my kids were discouraged about mealtimes. When the electricity came back, I heated the bacon in a pan. The smell filled the kitchen in about 30 seconds. Everyone's mood shifted immediately. That kind of morale impact is hard to measure until you experience it firsthand. Over the past several months, availability has been declining. Brands that used to be consistently stocked are now on back order. Some appear discontinued. I called one manufacturer directly and received a vague response about ongoing production challenges with no timeline for improvement. You do not realize how much morale matters until you are on day 3 of eating cold beans out of a can. Bulk bouillon. Most people are familiar with the small boxers of bouillon cubes you see in grocery stores, usually 12 to 24 cubes. Those are fine for everyday cooking. What I am talking about is the commercial scale containers. 200 cubes or more. These used to be reliably stocked at warehouse stores. Nowadays, they are often completely out of stock. A single cube makes about a cup of broth, roughly 5 cents worth of flavor. Compare that to canned broth, which typically runs around $2 per can. And storage-wise, the difference is remarkable. 200 bouillon cubes fit into a container about the size of a shoebox. The same amount in canned broth would take up a sizable section of a closet. But the real value of bouillon is what it does to everything else in your pantry. Plain rice cooked in bouillon becomes something you actually want to eat. Beans, simmered with bouillon and a little fat, become genuinely satisfying. Even canned vegetables with bouillon become a real soup. I ran a side-by-side test. Rice. 3 ways. Plain water. Salted water. Bouillon. My family tasted each version blind. The winner was not close. Bouillon won by a wide margin. My kids said they could eat it every single day. I currently have 800 bouillon cubes stored, 400 chicken and 400 beef. The total cost was about $60. 800 servings of broth, at roughly 7 cents each. That is hard to beat in terms of cost, convenience, and the impact it has on turning basic food into something worth eating. 800 servings of broth for $60. That is not a prepper luxury. That is the smartest $60 in your pantry. Cans, sardines, and mackerel. I avoided sardines for most of my adult life. The smell alone was enough. Then I started seriously looking at foods that are nutritionally dense, shelf-stable, and available in meaningful quantities. And sardines kept showing up at the top of every list, particularly for their omega-3 fatty acid content. A single can provides more omega-3 self than many fish oil supplements, plus a solid dose of protein and fat-soluble vitamins. In a situation where your diet is not varied, that kind of nutrition is not optional. It directly supports brain function, mood, immune health, and cardiovascular function. Missing it for too long has noticeable effects on how your body and your mind perform. I made a commitment to eat sardines twice a week for a month to actually adjust to them. The first can was unpleasant. By the third or fourth, something shifted. By the end of the month, I was actively choosing to eat them. I noticed real differences. Focus felt sharper. Energy more consistent throughout the day. Now here is the concerning part. Global sardine and mackerel fisheries are under increasing pressure from overfishing and changing ocean conditions. Several major fisheries have already reduced their catch quotas. 3 years ago, a quality can of sardines cost about $2. Today, the same can is $4 or more. a 100% price increase in 3 years. On multiple recent grocery trips, I have found shelves where sardines should be either mostly empty or completely bare. The ones packed in olive oil are the ones worth looking for. The oil adds calories and nutritional value. Shelf life on most cans runs 3 to 5 years. 100% price increase in 3 years combined with declining availability. That is not a glitch. That is a trend with real momentum behind it. Cooking oil in large containers. 2 years ago, a gallon jug of vegetable or canola oil cost around $6. Last month, I paid $13 for the exact same size. That is more than double in 24 months. But it is not only the cost. Availability has become genuinely inconsistent. On several occasions over the past 3 months, I went to multiple stores specifically looking for gallon jugs of oil and found empty shelves every time. The reasons are global and layered. Sunflower oil production was severely disrupted by the conflict in Ukraine, which was previously one of the world's largest exporters. Palm oil is facing production limits and regulatory restrictions in several key producing countries. Soybean oil prices have been climbing alongside rising grain costs. These pressures are not temporary. Here is the part most people completely overlook. From a nutritional standpoint, dietary fat is non-negotiable. Your body requires it to function properly. And most of the staple foods people stockpile, rice, beans, canned vegetables, grains, contain almost no fat on their own. Relying on those foods without adequate fat can lead to serious health problems within weeks. Fatigue, difficulty concentrating, hormonal imbalances, weakened immunity. Cooking oil solves this directly. A single tablespoon provides about 120 calories of pure fat. Adding a few tablespoons to your meals each day transforms them from filling to genuinely sustaining. A practical system that works well is keeping 12 gallons on hand, stored somewhere cool and away from light. Every 2 months, pull the oldest container and use it in everyday cooking, immediately replacing it with a fresh jug. That keeps your supply rotating and always fresh. People stockpile rice and beans and completely forget that without fat, those calories will start failing your body in ways you will not see coming until they already have. Honey in large jars. Archaeologists have discovered honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that is more than 3,000 years old. They tested it. It was still perfectly edible. That is not a marketing story. That is chemistry. The combination of extremely low moisture content, acidic pH, and the natural production of hydrogen peroxide makes honey one of the most inhospitable environments for bacteria and microorganisms that exists in nature. From a food storage perspective, honey is essentially a set-it-and-forget-it item. You can buy it, store it somewhere reasonable, and it will not freeze, it will not overheat, and it will not go bad. But here is where things are getting concerning. Large format honey. The multi-pound jugs and 5-pound containers that actually make sense for long-term storage has become increasingly difficult to find. Small jars are still widely available. The big containers that make economic and practical sense are often sporadic or completely out of stock. Prices have risen significantly over the past 2 years due to ongoing choline collapse issues that have reduced domestic bee populations, combined with increasing scrutiny and restrictions on imported honey supplies. And honey is far more than a sweetener. It functions as a wound care agent with genuine antibacterial properties, a cough suppressant and throat soother, a quick and reliable source of energy. In a situation where normal medical care is difficult to access, honey has real practical value as a basic first aid resource. That is not an exaggeration. That is how it has been used for thousands of years, and the science behind why it works has been well established. The large containers offer the best cost per ounce and the most efficient storage. If you see them in stock, it is worth buying more than you think you need. This is one of the very few foods that has a genuinely indefinite shelf life. That is an extraordinary thing in the context of any pantry. And right now, it is still sitting on the shelf. None of what I have shared with you today is theoretical. None of it is based on forum speculation or someone's worst-case scenario imagined in a basement. This is what I have personally observed in stores across multiple states over several months of consistent, deliberate tracking. The pattern is real. The causes are documented. And the window to act quietly, without stress, without straining your budget, is still open right now. You do not need to reorganize your life. You do not need to make massive purchases. The most effective approach is boring, sustainable, and completely consistent. On your next 3 grocery trips, add 2 items from this list to your cart. Just 2. That will not hit your budget in any meaningful way, but repeated consistently over a few trips, you will look at your pantry and realize you have quietly built a real, usable buffer for your family. Not a fantasy stockpile, an actual cushion between your household and uncertainty. When a store employee tells you they do not know when something will be restocked, take that seriously. In decades of retail experience, that is not a casual answer. It signals a real problem somewhere upstream in the supply chain. The people who will be in the best position 6 months from now are the ones who acted while things were still calm and uneventful. Not when the news starts covering it. Not when the shelves are visibly bare. Now, start this week. Pick 2 items. Stay calm, stay consistent, and take care of your people.